Thor Love and Thunder, as a movie, just does not work for me. Over time, it sat strangely, and it took me a while to figure out why. Because originally, I enjoyed the movie. Thought it was a little sillier than it probably should have been, but otherwise succeeded in telling a breezy story peppered with strong emotional moments, much like Ragnarok did 5 years earlier. And I know many people, including other video essayists, have made many points about how the dialogue and scene construction led to Love and Thunder falling flat, and I do not disagree with them, although I do think when it comes to dialogue, a lot of that is at least intentional. It's just how Taika writes some of his characters, for better or for worse. But no, that wasn't what lost me. And as it begins its Oscar campaign, I was forced to re-examine Thor 4, see if I could pin down what I didn't like. And I think it comes down to a fundamental problem with one character, Gorr. Now, I've heard plenty of people make the point that he is underutilized and fades into the background of a lot of the movie, and again, I don't disagree with those criticisms, but that's not my problem. My problem is with his world, because that opening scene where Gorr's family dies and he's left alone only to discover the god he's been praying to not only does not know he exists, but doesn't really care, that scene really works, and it sets up an interesting conflict. Gorr wants to kill all the gods. Thor is a god. Uh-oh, he might kill Thor. Wonderful. And then the next scene reinforces this conflict. Thor is answering the prayers of some aliens who are being terrorized by owl puppets, but in the process of saving their temple, destroys it, and the aliens are clearly upset. Thor, a god, did what is apparently his godly duty and stopped the owls, but he did it carelessly, causing collateral damage that the aliens are not thrilled by. It's communicated very clearly by the moment where Thor heroically whips his cloak off and gets ready for battle, but throws it in the face of the priest. But to understand exactly what those two moments are trying to say, we need to examine something that's always been a bit unclear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What is a god? What I mean is, if you are a god, what do you do? What is your job? What is expected of you? Is there a difference between what normal people think gods should be doing and what gods think gods should be doing? And was this always the case? And I'm not only asking these questions to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking. I believe to understand the central conflict and the themes that come with it, we need to know how the gods work. Does what Thor has been doing for the last 15 or so years count as god stuff? Or has Thor been ignoring his godly duties to be a hero? If it's the first thing, then Thor's a great god. If it's the second, Thor might be a great hero but a lousy god. And that makes all the difference when the villain's plan was set into motion by lousy gods. So okay, we've got plenty of gods in the MCU. Let's start with the Asgardians. Originally, at least for me, it felt like the whole god thing was something we Earthlings put on them. They were just humanoid aliens with long lifespans and technology that made them appear to be gods. They visited Earth, saved us from some monsters, and some of us worshipped them. In the first movie, Thor did not have any responsibilities to his subjects. However, Odin did travel to Norway in the 8th century to stop an invasion of Midgard by Laufey, so at least Odin saw it as his duty to protect one of his realms who, at the time, had plenty of worshippers. In Thor 2, Thor spends some time going around the universe and sorting out chaos caused by the destruction of the Bifrost, but that seems to be largely a product of the fact that the Nine Realms are sort of a United States situation and Asgard is their ruling government. It isn't clear whether the people of Vanaheim actually worship Thor or if they see him as a superpowered soldier. Over time, we were introduced to more characters with their own gods. The Wakandans worship Bast, the panther god, who bears some relation to Bastet of Egyptian mythology. Bast gives the Wakandan royalty access to the heart-shaped herb and the ancestral plane, and because of this connection to the afterlife, it certainly seems like Bast is undeniably real. T'Challa also mentions Sekhmet, another traditionally Egyptian lion god, so the Wakandan gods seem related closely to the Aeneid, the supergroup of Egyptian gods. It's unclear to me if they are the same or if they just share names and descriptions. There are also Celestials, which we've known about since Guardians 1, but Eternals is the first time we see much of what they're up to. They seed life throughout the universe and are responsible for creating entire galaxies, so their actions are very godlike. And there are 2 Celestials at the Omnipotent City, so someone must worship them. Moon Knight gives us a look at the Aeneid as part of the Egyptian Pantheon. We spend time with Khonshu and Ammit and learn that they exist on Earth but need to work through an avatar, so closer to what Bast does with the Black Panther than what Thor is doing. These gods argue amongst one another and don't seem to control all that much. Also, these gods seem somewhat redundant. For instance, Hathor is the god of beauty, among other things. But hey, so is a member of the Greek pantheon, Aphrodite. I understand the afterlife being associated with the gods you believe in. There's some gods that do that, and it makes sense why every culture would have their own underworld god. But are Hathor and Aphrodite constantly fighting over beautiful things? Does every god control those aspects of reality for only their followers? What about gods of storms or the sea? And I'd say those names don't really matter were it not for the moment when Zeus makes fun of Thor for being a god of what he perceives to be a lesser area of expertise. Thunder is just the sound made by lightning, even though clearly those are the god of the same thing, just described differently. The domain descriptors almost feel like yearbook superlatives given to the gods by their subject that don't mean much more than that. There also exists some deities that are worshipped in the MCU who we have not yet met. Christian God gets a shout out in Avengers 1 and constantly in the somewhat now canon Daredevil series. We've got some Jewish characters like Mark Spector and some Muslim characters like Kamala Khan. As far as I can tell, none of these gods or prophets were present in any Omnipotent City wide shots. So those are the gods. Except there is one more group we haven't talked about that are getting their own mini segment. The Eternals don't make any sense. In their movie, we learn that some Eternals share names with some Greek and Mesopotamian gods, and it is implied that many of their adventures inspired stories told about those gods, the same way that the legend of the mythological hero Icarus was something Sprite made up about the eternal Icarus. So let's take one for example. Athena. She was presumably the inspiration for the Greek Athena, and throughout history, some of her exploits were credited to the god Athena, which makes sense. Eternal's Athena is a warrior, god Athena is one of the Greek gods of war. So the MCU just has no actual Athena, just the Eternal. Except in Love and Thunder, we see Minerva at the Council of Gods. And if you're like me and you watched Hercules as a kid and got way too into Greek mythology, you know that Minerva is the Roman version of Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom and war. So there is also an Athena figure running around in the universe. And it seems like she was named in the credits of Love and Thunder to avoid confusion with the Eternal, since every other member of the Greek and Roman pantheon goes by their Greek name. So which came first? Well, we know Athena was sent to Earth in 5000 BC. In our history, the earliest Greek gods are documented as having been worshipped was around 2000 BC. So assuming the MCU works the same way, Athena came before Athena. So what happened here? My best explanation is that Athena was doing her thing with the Eternals and developed a reputation as a warrior. Then Minerva showed up and was either nicknamed or mistakenly identified as Athena. This was eventually changed to Athena, and that name stuck, at least with the Greeks, but the gods go by Minerva to avoid the confusion. I'd imagine the same is true of Hermes and Hephaestus. Just a bunch of coincidences. But okay, so what do gods in the MCU seem to do and how do they work? Honestly, it seems like their job is mostly about going to meetings. They travel to the Omnipotent City or convene at their own pantheon to do god things. Sure, Thor travels the universe saving people from owls, but so do the Guardians, and they're not gods. That's just something people in this universe do. Some gods have jobs, like Taweret in Moon Knight. They perform a task, usually pertaining to that culture's afterlife. Alternatively, even though Khonshu is the god of the moon, his role does not seem as active. Khonshu does not need to control the night sky. He charges Mark with protecting the travelers of the night, so maybe Khonshu is more generally a night god who protects people during the night, like Batman. Some gods seem to like to be worshipped. Gorr's god, Habuska, makes it clear that he believes worshipping and dying for his god is Gorr's only purpose. We know that's not true, but maybe Habuska is just a particularly bad god. Also, at no point during the run of the MCU do we see that the gods like Santa and Elf are powered by the belief of their followers. If anything, it appears to be nothing more than a metric some gods use to gauge their success. But like in Love and Thunder, if a god stops being worshipped, they do not cease to exist. Habuska the Horrible has no worshippers and he doesn't seem to care. The gods also seem to be protectors. Zeus explains to Thor that every god has a duty to protect their own people. So maybe they function more like a Green Lantern does, where each god has a sector and it is their job to keep that sector safe. One other thing, we know all gods are more durable than your average person, and while anyone can injure them, it seems like you can only be killed by another god or a special weapon, and sometimes even another god with a special weapon is not enough. But gods we've seen killed are Frigga, killed by Curse, Hela, killed by Surtur, Heimdall, who I think was a god, and Loki, killed by Thanos. So everyone is killed by a heavy hitter. In Avengers, Loki's even able to take a beating from an enraged Hulk and survive, so it may be that even a being as powerful as Hulk is technically incapable of killing a god. So knowing everything we know about Thor, is he a good god? On one hand, yes. he's very actively protecting the entire universe and the 9 realms, which seem to be his sector. He's not always succeeding, but he's trying. Surprisingly, Thor has very few worshippers. I don't understand why the MCU does not have a Church of Thor yet, but you figure one would show up eventually. Although after I put this video on Nebula, more on that later, someone pointed out that there is actually a sign for the Church of Asgard in Spider-Man Homecoming. So that's a good start. As far as directly answering prayers, Thor doesn't do that through like actual prayers. He answers distress calls, but same difference. And Thor attends the meetings, which is very important. On the other hand, he's not perfect. He's not taking his responsibility seriously, and he may have created another Gorr in the process, albeit less malevolently. Furthermore, he may be one of the only good gods. Keep in mind, while Valkyrie is an Asgardian, she does not appear to be the god of anything. And Jane is more like a demigod, since she's also half human. Only Thor, Bast, and to a lesser extent Loki intervened to stop Thanos, who posed an existential threat to half of all life in the universe. So all of these gods let half of their followers be snapped. Not great protecting. So Gorr believes his god was bad and deserved to die, and because of the influence of the Necrosword, which I don't love, but whatever, believes all gods are the same. They make everyone's lives worse, so all gods must die. And while Thor is not a bad guy, he's not a very good god either. So this asks us a question. Do gods deserve this, or can they become better? A question Thor will answer. Many of the other Marvel villains we like do this. Killmonger works about the same way. He was wronged by the Wakandans personally and believes their isolationist policies have harmed the black community. So Killmonger is going to take control of Wakanda and change its policy towards the outside world. His change involves waging war, but you get the idea. So over the course of the movie, T'Challa learns something from Killmonger and eventually does change Wakanda's isolationist policy in his own way. There's more to it than that. FD Signifier made a great video that explains it, but that's the basics. Vulture also follows a similar path, gets screwed over by Tony Stark when damage control destroys his business, so Toomes starts a new business stealing high-tech trash from the wreckage left by superheroes and repurposing it into weapons to sell. Now clearly the weapons part is bad, but without that, nothing he's doing is all that bad. Sort of irresponsible, but the idea that this honest, hardworking businessman was forced into a life of crime by some rich jerk does make Peter's position complicated. Is Toomes really a bad guy? Is Stark a bad influence? So with Gorr, you have a pretty obvious path here. Thor needs to learn this truth about the gods and do better somehow, and presumably better than he'd been doing at the start of the movie. And lucky for us, one of the main characters we're going to be spending a lot of time with is a human who is now a god. So she has a unique perspective on how people view gods and then how gods view people, and the relationship between both. And when Thor goes to the omnipotent city expecting to see his hero Zeus, his disappointment is the perfect next step on his journey. Is Gorr right? Are the gods all bad? Maybe. He hasn't met one that lives up to their worshippers' expectations. Zeus embarrasses Thor, none of the other gods come to his aid or even seem concerned. There are no other good gods. And in this scene, it's Thor that kills a bunch of gods. So he's kind of co-signing Gorr's philosophy and to some extent his methods. Assuming all these guys they kill on the stage are gods, he is literally butchering them. And then he air quotes murders Zeus and steals his thunderbolt. And I'm not saying Thor was wrong to do that, but in a story where Gorr is killing gods, having your hero go to the gods for help only to kill them is interesting. Whenever your protagonist and antagonist do the same thing, it highlights something interesting, either a contradiction at the heart of the hero, or a villain with something to teach the hero, or both. So from this point, you sort of figure you can see where this is going. Thor's going to find Gorr. Gorr is going to say, "We're not so different, you and I." Thor's going to lose the fight and ponder Gorr's position. Are the gods bad? Do they all deserve this? Does he deserve this? And Thor's going to realize his own failings. And maybe he'd reconsider what being a god means. Is it about being worshipped? Is he there to destroy or protect? Thor uses his gifts exclusively for fighting monsters. In the beginning of the movie, he says his life was boiled down to being needed for winning battles. But could he be a better god by doing something else? This idea even harkens back to Odin's original speech about Mjolnir from the first Thor movie, which just reappeared in this movie. So that has to mean something thematically. So Thor's going to change. He's going to make some big sacrifice, something so serious that it will show Gorr the error of his ways and stop his crusade. Maybe even let Jane make the wish to bring Gorr's daughter back instead of cure her own cancer, proving to Gorr that gods can be selfless. And from that point on, Thor will spend more of his phenomenal cosmic power enriching the lives of everyone in the universe. Not just fighting monsters, but helping to build things or get people places, answering prayers. And maybe he'll even reform the gods. In Zeus's absence, Thor could take up a role as their leader and show them how to be better gods, create a positive change in the universe. All because Gorr was right, sort of. And that's why this ending confounds me. Thor has a daughter, but he's still just fighting battles, like he did in the beginning of the movie. And even worse, in 2 post-credit scenes, Jane goes to Valhalla, which is fine if Gorr did not already bring up the fact that normal people do not get an eternal reward, as a way to illustrate the hypocrisy at the heart of the gods. Only the special people go to heaven. But the movie ends with Jane using a super specific loophole to get to heaven. Gorr is right. Valhalla is an unfair afterlife. And then we see Zeus talking to Hercules about revenge, even though Zeus certainly seemed dead, and this whole plotline felt more or less over. Why are we going to retread this ground in a future movie? Just solve the problem here. Kill Zeus. Take his place. Reform the gods. But no. This interesting thread is more or less dropped after the confrontation in the Shadow Realm. Thor never learns any lesson about being a god. He adopts Gorr's daughter and goes back to what he was doing when the story started. He saves groups of people with big fights, and yes, adopting Gorr's daughter proves that he is a good person, but what does that mean in the context of Thor's role as a god? Thor makes a personal change, but is not able to affect any societal change. Why can't it be like Black Panther, where Wakanda is no longer a secret, but exactly 10 minutes into the second Black Panther movie, Wakanda is again isolated. I'm not judging the decision in the movie, but we went through all this trouble to explain why isolation was a problem. Or in Spider-Man, Peter clearly understands the problem with damage control, even if he doesn't have all the information. It is a billionaire-funded arm of the government that pushes small businessmen like Adrian Toomes out of the way, without any compensation. It left Toomes and his friends in a difficult financial spot. Now again, I'm not saying what Toomes did was right, but at the end of the movie, after Peter rejects Tony, he's just given his fancy suit back and keeps doing what he was doing. Nobody addresses the issues with damage control. In fact, since Homecoming, they've grown significantly and become a problem, one that Peter could have forced Stark to address. What would that look like? I don't know, some sort of restitution to other businesses like Toomes, maybe regulations on what they could do. I'm sure Tony could spare the money and the political capital, but nothing really changes in the big picture. Sure, now Thor has a daughter, but the system of godly neglect that created Gorr has not been addressed. Most of these negligent gods are still alive, having not learned the error of their ways. There will be another Gorr. Maybe not another necro sword, but another person who curses the gods because their gods forsook them, and that person will also be right. But why? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe seem incapable of representing any foundational societal change? The status quo always remains the same. Well, I've got 3 guesses. Guess 1, it's too hard. Big change requires an amount of cohesion that not even the Marvel Cinematic Universe can offer. Like say in one of these, Talokan actually declared war on the surface world, for whatever reason. President's evil, global warming, you can't get Mountain Dew Baja Blast outside of a Taco Bell year-round. It doesn't matter. But if Namor was its own franchise in its own universe, nothing is stopping them from doing this. But in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, unless it's being resolved in one movie, which it probably is not because the trailers would spoil it, we've got some time until the next Namor movie, let's say 2 years. For 2 years, movies and shows and special presentations set in the present need to acknowledge the fact that the surface world is at war with Namor. That means writers and directors need to know this stuff years in advance. And then, if the writer of the Namor movie changes their mind because, they decide the story's better if he actually doesn't declare war against the surface world, now we need to cut a bunch of plot lines and references from Wonder Man and Shang-Chi 2. They all need to be changed to accommodate the one development in a movie they are not very connected to otherwise. So that's not ideal. It's much simpler if the world before the Thor movie starts is pretty much the same as the one after, except one character dies and one has a kid. So it's more manageable from a production standpoint. Is that a good excuse? No, not if it makes the movies worse, but it is one I think is likely. Guess 2. Disney does not want change. Disney is the big dog, the king of the rock, and at a high level, they cannot help but want things to stay the same. Like all the rich and powerful people, Disney is threatened by change. So whether intentionally or not, the movies cannot promote that change. Ant-Man is about how the bad guy wants to change the world with this technology, and the good guys want to keep everything the same. Same goes for Iron Man, the Hulk. The special thing is in the hands of a small group of special good people, and the worst thing imaginable would be if that thing got out and everyone could use it. Does that sound like how Disney has lobbied for copyright restrictions to be strengthened over the last 50 years? They create Mickey Mouse. 70 plus years passes. Mickey Mouse is going into the public domain because that's how it works. Then Disney steps in like Hank Pym. No, don't let Mickey get into the wrong hands. And the copyright protections are extended. This is why nothing ever makes it into the public domain anymore. Mickey should be in the public domain. Donald, Minnie, Goofy. It is wild that a company that made all their money animating stories from the public domain is fighting so hard to keep characters like Elsa and Simba and Woody and everyone's favorite Avatar character Scoresby out of the public domain for the rest of time. So yeah, why would Disney make a story about a bunch of heroes who beat a villain who is doing the same thing Disney is doing? So this idea for why nothing ever changes is not a directive from the top down. It is a product of everything else that Disney is more than happy to perpetuate. And then guess 3. We don't want change. Perhaps we, the audience, want these movies to take place in a world like our own. The world outside our window cuts both ways. We want Wakanda forever, to exist in a world that is largely the same as the one we live in, even though there are gods and aliens, and Tony Stark has invented free energy in pretty much every movie he's been in. All of these innovations need to go away because they would make the world of sequels 20 or 30 projects down the line unrecognizable from our own. Why doesn't the MCU have flying cars yet? Why isn't vibranium everywhere? Why isn't nanotech everywhere? Why hasn't everyone who ever lost a limb but wants their old limb back been able to use extremists to do that? Why don't hospitals have the kimono beads where you just put the bead in a bullet wound and everything's fine? What about the multiple forms of invisibility? Why haven't the MCU cops picked that up yet? Or the army? Why doesn't anyone but Tony Stark have all of Tony Stark's projection computer technology? That's been in this universe since 2008, because that world would seem alien. This is why stories like Invincible and The Boys are so groundbreaking in a world where their superheroes aren't doing anything that new power-wise. Consequences of their big season-ending events continue, ripple out. Every season needs to follow the season before it. On that note, 2 other ideas. First one, most people aren't going to see every movie. So back to the Namor example, let's say Black Panther 2 bombs. I know. They can't just have characters talking about how scared they are about World War III with Talokan if there is not a reasonable assumption that everyone watching this movie knows what Talokan is. And since they don't know ahead of time what's going to be a hit and what is not, they cannot depend on any big movies being a constant. Except for the other example, and this is sub-idea 2, The Snap was sort of a dud. The Snap is the only other one of these, and look at how it played out outside of the movies where it is the main plot point. We skipped over the Snap in universe, which sure, fine, that makes sense. But then, the blip. We have had unsatisfying story after unsatisfying story about how terrible the blip was. Far From Home and Falcon and the Winter Soldier probably put the most energy into exploring the consequences of bringing everyone back, and it was not that interesting. So maybe Marvel learned that lesson, and none of these are worth the trouble unless you have a great idea going in. So why can't Thor reform the gods? Because that would involve changing Black Panther and Moon Knight and the other gods that exist in this universe. It is so much easier if at the end of this movie everything's pretty much the same as it was before, but Jane is dead, Thor has a new daughter, and a new enemy floating around in Hercules. Also, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking, I get it. Zeus didn't want to go fight Gorr, and maybe Hercules in this universe is so loyal to Zeus that if Zeus didn't want to do it, Hercules didn't want to do it. But what about Ares? We know he exists in this universe. He was apparently on Sakaar for a while and was enough of a champion that he got his head on the building of winning heads. But like, maybe Hercules won't bite at that, but Ares is all about that. If you walked into the Omnipotent City and said, hey, there's a god that wants to kill all of the gods, I want to go fight him, does anybody want to come with me? You could not stop Ares from coming with you. I have a feeling this means he's either dead or lost or in god jail or something like that, and we'll find out later. Hey everybody, Nando here. Got a quick announcement, so hang around, especially if you like my pitch videos, because I'll be talking about my next one. Okay, so you've probably heard of Nebula, the creator-owned subscription streaming service that I helped to create. So we've got Nebula exclusive videos there. Those are called Nebula Plus. They have a little plus sign in the thumbnail. Well, there's something new we are trying called Nebula First. Basically, whenever I release a video on YouTube, the next video will already be finished and published on Nebula. So you can watch my next video, which is the Deadpool 3 pitch. I'm so excited about it. I've been sharing teases of the thumbnail on Twitter, where I black out certain characters and reveal them over time. So like the most surprising ones show up in the end. Here is the full thumbnail. So if you haven't seen those, this is what you're gonna get. Oh, I just love it. It's easily the corniest one of these I've written in a while, but it's 2023, we're embracing that. That's my resolution this year. And you can watch that video right now. The whole Nebula First thing is very cool. A bunch of other creators you probably like are doing it, so give it a look. It has its own little rail on the homepage. So if you've been thinking about joining Nebula, this is the best time. And we have partnered with this video sponsor, CuriosityStream, to bring you a bundle that includes CuriosityStream's incredible documentary content like this one called Becoming Martian, which, if you are familiar with Deadpool and the X-Men and the comics and what's going on right now, that is relevant. You can get all of this for less than $15 a year. That's like $2 a month. It is such a steal. The landing page doesn't make it super clear, but if you use my link and you sign up for the cheapest annual plan on there, it does give you access to Nebula and CuriosityStream. Go to curiositystream.com/Nando to sign up, and then go to Nebula and watch my next video, be it the Deadpool 3 pitch or whatever comes after that. As always, huge thanks to all my patrons, people who listen to Mostly Nitpicking, and everyone who watches these videos on Nebula. Stay safe, everybody.